Hey everyone, and welcome back to SciPlaned. Today we're going to be looking at something kind of different. We're going to be looking at the psychology of people who actually seem to want chaos in the world. Pretty wild concept, right?
It is. We always hear about, those people who thrive in uncertain times, but what's actually going on in their minds? Well,
Okay.
that's what we're going to be exploring today. And we're drawing on some really fascinating research from Science News for this one.
Awesome. So this research suggests that actually a pretty big chunk of the population, about 15% in the U.S., might actually desire chaos, which
Okay.
really challenges the idea that, we all just crave stability.
It really does. Yeah, it suggests that there's a significant portion of society who might actually be drawn to something totally different. And what's even more fascinating is that there's no one-size-fits-all profile, like a chaos seeker. The research actually points to two main types: destroyers and rebuilders.
Okay, so those are pretty self-explanatory names. So the destroyers seem to be the ones who almost get a thrill out of just watching systems collapse, regardless of the consequences. So what's the motivation there?
I think for them, it's not necessarily about logic or,
Yeah.
like planning for the future. It's really more about the disruption itself. So imagine someone who feels like society's rules are rigged against them. They might find a really strange sense of satisfaction in seeing those structures just crumble. It's almost like a symbolic leveling of the playing field.
All right, so they might not even have a clear vision of what comes after the chaos. It's just that they want to see the existing order disrupted.
Yeah.
And then we have the rebuilders,
Yeah.
who also want chaos, but for them it's a means to an end.
Exactly. Think about it like this. Imagine like a house that's been neglected for years. Faulty wiring, leaky roof, the whole deal. Some people might, try to patch things up here and there, but the rebuilders would argue that the whole structure is just too far gone. And they believe you need to like tear it down completely to actually build something new and hopefully better. And that's kind of how they view societal systems.
Okay, so for them, chaos is like a controlled demolition, like a necessary step to kind of make way for a fresh start. You could almost draw parallels to historical revolutions, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Periods of intense upheaval that eventually lead to, new forms of government and social order.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Think about the French Revolution. It was obviously a period of immense chaos and violence, but it did eventually lead to a pretty radical restructuring of French society. Of course, whether or not the new order was actually quote unquote better is obviously a matter of historical debate, but it just highlights how like the desire for change, even
Yeah,
through chaos, can be a really powerful force in shaping history.
for sure. So that kind of brings us to the crucial question. What actually drives people to become quote-unquote chaos seekers in the first place? Like, what's going on beneath the surface?
So one really prominent theory is the status loss theory. And that suggests that the desire for chaos might actually be a response to feeling like you were losing your place in society. And it's not necessarily about actual material deprivation, but more like a perceived loss of status or power.
So it's less about being poor and more about just feeling like you're falling behind, like the world is leaving you behind, almost like a sense of being forgotten or overlooked.
Exactly. It can be an individual feeling that, they're not where they quote unquote should be in life, or it could even be like a group feeling that their values and their way of life are being threatened. So
Yeah.
think about, just how rapidly the world is changing, right? Technology, globalization, shifting social norms, all of that can really contribute to a sense of unease and, you know, a yearning for something different.
So in a way, chaos seeking is a way of trying to regain control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. It's almost like saying, well, if the world's going to be crazy anyways, at least let it be on my terms.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And that feeling of status loss can be even more intensified by things like
Hmm.
rising inequality and globalization. Because when people see others, you know, getting ahead while they feel stuck, it can fuel a lot of resentment and a desire to just overturn the system that they perceive as unfair.
Right, they're looking for a way to kind of shake things up, to disrupt the game that they feel like they're losing. So how does individual personality play into all of this? Are some people just simply more predisposed to this kind of thinking?
That's where things get even more interesting. So, research suggests that while chaos seeking itself isn't a fixed personality trait, certain people might be a little bit more susceptible to it, especially during times of societal stress.
So are we talking like the stereotypical lone wolf type who thrives on disruption and doesn't care about the rules? Right.
Not necessarily. There's actually a really complex interplay of personality traits that might come into play here. For example, individuals with traits like narcissism, they might feel entitled to a certain level of status and power. And if they perceive that they're losing it, They might be more likely to lash out or seek some kind of radical change.
So it's almost like their sense of self-worth is tied to their position in society. And any threat to that position feels like a personal attack. So when the world feels chaotic and their status is threatened, they're more likely to embrace even more chaos
Right.
to try and regain control.
That's a great way to think about it. But it is important to note, though, that this isn't, just like a simple cause and effect relationship. Personality is just one piece of the puzzle. The broader social and economic context plays a huge role as well.
Right? We can't just reduce it to saying, oh, these people are just narcissists, that's why they want chaos. It's a much more complex kind of interplay of individual psychology and societal forces. Speaking of societal forces, what role does political ideology play in all this? Is this like a left versus right issue?
That's one of the most interesting takeaways from the research, actually, because it kind of debunks the myth that chaos seeking is solely a left-wing or right-wing phenomenon. It can actually manifest across the political spectrum, driven by different but oftentimes converging motivations.
So it's not as simple as saying that, conservatives crave stability and liberals embrace change. Chaos seeking can emerge from both sides, fueled by this complex mix of personal anxieties, social grievances, and just this desire for something different.
Exactly. You can have individuals on both the left and the right who feel very alienated from the mainstream political discourse, and they see chaos as a way to just disrupt the status quo, even if their visions of what comes after the chaos are vastly different.
That's a really important point. It means that we need to look beyond those superficial political labels, and dig a little deeper into the underlying anxieties and frustrations that might be driving people towards these more extreme views.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're all dealing with this rapidly changing world, and we're all grappling with, uncertainty about the future. So understanding the nuances of why some people might be drawn to chaos is crucial for having any sort of constructive conversations, and hopefully finding solutions that can actually work for everybody.
It sounds like this chaos-seeking phenomenon is a lot more complex than we might initially think. It's not just about, a few malcontents who like to watch the world burn. There are deeper psychological and societal forces at play.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that chaos seeking can often stem from very real grievances and anxieties that need to be addressed, even if we don't agree with, the methods or the desired outcomes. And it's not just, those who feel like they're on the losing end of the system who might be drawn to chaos. The research also suggests that those who fear losing their advantage might also be susceptible.
Okay, so it's not just a case of like the have-nots versus the haves. It's a little more nuanced than that. So even those who benefit from the existing system might be drawn to chaos if they feel like their position is threatened.
That's right. Think about it. Those who've, traditionally held power and privilege, they might see any change, even if it's, aimed at creating a fairer system, as a potential loss for them. It's a fear of being displaced, of their world becoming unrecognizable.
Yeah, so both ends of the spectrum, in a way, can experience this sense of insecurity and fear of losing what they have, whether it's a little or a lot. That's a pretty powerful motivator.
It really is. And it highlights how deeply ingrained the fear of scarcity can be. It's not just about material resources. It's also about power, influence, social standing. When people feel like they're constantly fighting to hold on to what they have or to gain what they feel they deserve, they can become much more receptive to those extreme solutions.
Right, it's like they're in a constant state of fight or flight, always on edge, always looking for threats.
Yeah.
And in that mindset, chaos might seem like a way to break free from the constraints of a system that they feel is rigged against them, regardless of whether they're at the top or the bottom.
Exactly. And, this phenomenon isn't limited to any particular country or culture either. We're seeing examples of this chaos-seeking and populist movements all over the globe, often fueled by these similar anxieties about rapid change and a perceived loss of control.
Wow. So it's not just an American thing. This is a global trend. What are some examples of how this is playing out in other parts of the world?
Well, we're seeing a rise in strongman leaders who promise to restore order and, make their country great again, often by appealing to these nationalist sentiments and blaming outsiders for their nation's problems. Think about, the rise of certain political figures in Europe, South America, and even Asia. They tap into that sense of unease, and they promise these simple solutions to really complex problems.
It's a familiar playbook. Scapegoating, fear-mongering, promising a return to a golden age that probably never really existed, and it just seems to resonate with people who feel like they've lost their footing in a world that's changing too fast.
Right. They're yearning for certainty, for someone to tell them that everything will be all right, that their values and their way of life are still relevant. And these leaders offer them a sense of belonging, a shared identity, and often an enemy to rally against.
Yeah, but that kind of us versus them thinking
Mm.
can be incredibly dangerous. It can lead to
Yeah.
erosion of democratic norms and institutions, and ultimately to more division and instability.
Absolutely. When people lose faith in the system, they're much more likely to accept these radical solutions, even those that threaten their own freedoms. That's why it's so crucial to understand, the motivations behind this chaos seeking. It's not about condoning destructive behavior, but rather about recognizing that it often stems from very real anxieties and grievances that need to be addressed.
Right. So we can't just dismiss these people as, irrational or dangerous. We need to engage with them, try to understand their perspectives, and offer alternative paths forward. But how do we do that? How do we bridge these divides and address these underlying anxieties in a way that leads to, you know, constructive change rather than more chaos?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's something that we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our discussion. We'll delve into some potential solutions and, consider how we can build a more resilient society that's less susceptible to that allure of chaos. But one thing is clear. Simply ignoring or demonizing those who are drawn to chaos won't make the problem go away. It'll likely make it worse.
Okay, so we've talked about, the psychology of these chaos seekers, the societal factors that contribute to this whole phenomenon, and, the dangers of just ignoring these underlying anxieties.
Yeah.
But where do we go from here? How do we actually mitigate the chaos? Is there a way to kind of address these issues without things spiraling out of control?
Yeah, it's definitely a complex challenge, and there are no easy answers. But I think there are a few key areas where we can focus our efforts. First and foremost, we have to address the issue of inequality head-on. When people feel like the system is rigged against them, they're much more likely to be receptive to those extreme solutions, and that's where things can get really dangerous.
That makes sense. So are we talking about policies that promote economic fairness? Things like progressive taxation, living wages, ensuring that everyone has access to, affordable health care.
Exactly. We need to create a system where everyone has a legitimate shot at a good life, regardless of their background or their circumstances. This means investing in education, job training, social safety nets that can provide a cushion for those who fall on hard times. It's really about creating a society where people feel supported and have the opportunity to thrive.
It sounds like it's not just about economic policy, though, right? We also need to address kind of those social and psychological factors that contribute to this feeling of being left behind and, losing control.
Absolutely. We need to foster a sense of community and belonging, where people feel connected to something larger than themselves. This might involve, strengthening social institutions, promoting civic engagement, creating opportunities for people to interact across social divides. It's really about building bridges and fostering empathy.
So things like community centers, volunteer organizations, even just informal gatherings where people can get to know each other and build relationships. It sounds like it's about creating spaces where people feel seen and heard and valued.
Exactly. It's about countering that isolation and alienation. That can fuel extremism, when people feel connected to their communities and have a sense of purpose. They're less likely to be drawn to these radical ideologies that promise those easy answers to complex problems.
And it seems like education has to play a crucial role in all of this as well. And in this age of information overload, we need to equip people with the critical thinking skills to actually navigate this complex information landscape and discern fact from fiction.
Absolutely. We're bombarded with information from all sides, and it can be really difficult to know what to trust. So we need to teach people how to evaluate sources, identify bias, and think critically about the information that they're consuming. It's about empowering individuals to become, more discerning consumers of information and to resist the allure of those simplistic solutions and scapegoating.
Right. It's like giving people the tools to build their own mental filters, to sift through all the noise and make informed decisions based on evidence and critical thinking. That feels more important now than ever.
It really is. And this also involves promoting media literacy and supporting independent journalism that provides accurate and unbiased reporting. We need reliable sources of information that people can turn to, especially in a world where trust in institutions is declining.
Because if people don't know where to turn for reliable information, they're more likely to fall prey to misinformation.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories, which can further fuel those feelings of anxiety and distrust. That can ultimately lead to more chaos seeking.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle that we need to break. And finally, I think we need to have a much broader conversation about the values that we want to uphold as a society. If we want to live in a world that's more just,
Mm.
equitable, and compassionate, we need to actively promote those values in our communities, our institutions, and just our interactions with each other.
So it's not just about tweaking policies or creating new programs. It's about a fundamental shift in our mindset, a commitment to building a society that actually prioritizes the well-being of all its members.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our fates are interconnected and that we all have a role to play in creating a more peaceful and prosperous future. And that starts with understanding and addressing the root causes of this chaos seeking, rather than simply dismissing or demonizing those who are drawn to it.
It's a challenging task, for
Yeah.
sure, but it feels absolutely essential if we want to build a future where everyone feels like they have a stake
Hmm.
and a voice. It's about creating a society that's resilient,
Yeah.
adaptable, and capable of navigating those inevitable changes and challenges that lie ahead.
Well said. It's about fostering hope and a sense of possibility, even in the face of uncertainty and complexity. That's the key to mitigating the chaos and building a better future for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this look at the psychology of chaos seekers here on SciPlaned. We hope you found this conversation insightful, and we hope it's given you some food for thought.
Yeah, and we encourage you to continue exploring this topic and engaging in these important discussions in your own communities, because the more we understand about the forces that shape our world, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and hopefully build a more just and equitable future for all.